first thing, can you just kind of walk me through the timeline of kind of when this case was presented to you guys and what, you know, went forward from there?
Boy, I'm not going to have the dates. So if your question concerns sort of the timing of when UVO became aware and when EPD became aware and when that's better to get from the news releases they've already put out. Frankly, I didn't have the timing down anywhere. So I can tell you that I read the charges. I read the police reports just a few days ago.
Okay, so it was within the last few days that you got it.
For me, yeah. And to be clear, I know some of the newer reporters here don't know this. There's about 150 or 170 criminal cases come into this office every week. So there are a bunch of deputy DAs. We have a major crimes team. We have several felony teams. And so this was reviewed by other DAs in my office before it ever came to me. It was reviewed and no-filed, and then when there was an eruption of increased public interest, I read it to make sure that we had done the right thing. So my personal awareness of the facts of the case and the office awareness are separated by a lot of time.
Okay. And so even with a case with high-profile people, even in the district attorney's office, you weren't made aware of this case? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, from time to time, I mean, from time to time, one slips away. I should have been notified of the case, but the fact is, my team evaluates cases like this, factually like this, with perhaps a less celebrity status, routinely, and so I didn't have concerns that they hadn't managed it appropriately.
And so, tell me a little bit about, you know, in your statement that you put out yesterday. You say, you know, this isn't about picking sides. It's based solely on evidence.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's fairly simple. In the American system of justice, a person is presumed to be innocent. So you can sort of imagine them on the side of the wall, and of a wall here. Guilty is over here, innocent is here, and somehow the state has to carry the burden over the top of that wall. And that wall is reasonable doubt. It is very, very tall. And so if we're unable to, if we are unable to produce the evidence that moves the case over that wall, then he stays in the innocent category with the innocent presumption. So it's not a matter of picking sides in terms of saying I like this version or that version of the story. The question is, what is the evidence that makes this the obvious truth of the matter? And so we analyze the evidence, and that means looking at testimonial evidence and anything which is inconsistent, internally inconsistent with respect to one person's version of events or versions of events if they've been interviewed multiple times, and also looking at other people and what their observations were and trying to sort of make a mosaic of all of the input and see how they fit. That's how it's done. In the end, it's an analysis of all the evidence. We routinely have cases that have little pieces which don't seem to help much or may even hurt a little bit, but that's the random nature of life. Things don't always go together perfectly. But they have to go together well enough so that a jury looking at the case is not just going to think it probably happened. They're going to have to know that they're confident it happened beyond a reasonable doubt. And that takes a good, strong case.
And so with this case, did the fact that the woman who came forward, did the fact that she had consensual sex with one of the people the next day and then another person on the team later in that week, did that kind of play a part in this?
I would say all of the pieces of evidence play a part. They tend to make something look more or less likely. So if you have a situation where somebody is being assaulted and they have a chance to get away, they're removed from the assault, and they appear to voluntarily go back into the assaultive environment, and then they have another chance to get away, and they appear to go back into the assaultive environment a third time. To the average juror, that's going to be hard to understand. They're going to say, why did you do this? So Now, that fact, or that sort of constellation of facts by itself, isn't enough to kill a case. But if you have enough collections of facts like that that cause jurors to say, that's inconsistent with everything I know about human behavior, that's a problem, right? What jurors do is they say, they are constantly asking themselves, how would I react in that situation? Is what they're telling me consistent with what I know about human nature? From time to time, rape victims and assault victims will behave in a way that may be counter to common sense, or quote unquote common sense, because they are they've been so victimized they don't defend themselves, or they have Stockholm syndrome, or any other number of problems. When we recognize those patterns, we can bring in experts who will educate us and educate the jury on them. But in a case like this, where the only issue is whether the sex was consent, everything that tends to make it look like it was consensual behavior cuts against conviction. So when the victim's friend says, characterize the interaction between the alleged victim and the alleged suspects as flirtatious and friendly, and that was after the first two alleged sexual assaults, that's inconsistent with what most people will expect. The fact that the alleged victim got into a taxi and apparently voluntarily went to a suspect's house with the same people who had assaulted her, that's inconsistent with juror expectations. When she's claiming that she's impaired by alcohol, but nobody sees her drinking at that house, she's only had 3 shots earlier in the evening, and nobody sees any physical, emotional, or speech behavior that's consistent with being impaired, including her friends say that she appears to be sober, or at least not adversely affected. That tends to cut against that. So I tried to sort of identify those things. I'm not saying this didn't happen just the way she described. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have any way of knowing what actually happened there. My responsibility is to look at the evidence and say, if this rolls out in front of 12 people, what are they going to do with this? And what is the evidence that cuts one way or the other? And as emotional and horrific and terrible as this all sounds, and wrong as it all sounds, proving the criminal elements would not be possible given this evidence. It just simply wouldn't be possible. And frankly, I've yet to meet anybody who's gone through the analysis who understands such things, who disagrees with that analysis. And on the law enforcement side, and there are no cases that we care more about than violent rapes and homicides and kidnaps. This is the stuff that matters. This isn't a lack of caring. This is wanting desperately to do the right thing and looking at the evidence and saying, it doesn't move us over that wall.
And so, with the University of Oregon obviously being involved in this, when athletes or even students are involved in cases like this, do you guys report to the university once you guys, do file charges or don't file charges in a case like this?
The University of Oregon hasn't been involved in our process, other than the police department, the University of Oregon PD. But no, they're not involved in our process in any way. Frankly, we're careful to make sure, I'm careful to make sure that we're not having that communication until after decisions are made. Then, as a courtesy, if there are any questions, I want to be helpful. I want to say, here, this is why we did what we did, and here's what we might be able to do in the future to reduce the possibility of this kind of situation happening again. That's an awkward way to say that, but for example, one of the judges and one of the DAs in my office has in the past met with a football team early on in the year and said, look, this is a new environment for most of you guys. Here's a list of do's and don'ts. Here's a list of risks. And here's a roadmap to behave appropriately in this community. And And I think maybe it's a good idea to do that with all incoming high-profile athletes who are going to be faced with, perhaps a different set of choices and challenges. But they're not involved in how the case is managed. We look at this like any other criminal case.
And so with a criminal case like this, you guys have to make sure, that while you're doing your investigation that no one else is kind of involved or aware of what's going on?
I guess what I'd say is that when we are doing, when law enforcement is going to investigate something, we would prefer to have a first cut at it. We don't want to have a bunch of other people who are not coordinated, not part of the team, interviewing our witnesses, collecting our evidence. It just makes the thing unimaginably messy, and particularly if the people aren't properly trained to interview, for example. So if there's an administrative investigation that has to take place, we totally understand that. But in keeping with best practices, we say let the law enforcement investigation take its course, and then we'll share information at the conclusion of the criminal process, and you can go forward with your investigation there. And that works out well in almost every environment, but there is an element of timing there.
And so you said you didn't know dates before. Do you know when your case was finished being investigated?
That's probably on the no-file document that was generated. I'm saying probably because I'm not sure, but it's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while.
And so you guys kind of, you weren't unaware of it until everything came out that these were athletes.
Yeah, well, I actually got a call from a friend who's outside the criminal justice system and said, "What's the deal with the U of O basketball players?" And I said, "What deal with the U of O basketball players?" So I called my chief deputy and said, "Something I need to know about?" And we worked through it.
Okay, and so this was handled no differently with high-profile athletes than it would have been with.
Oh, of course not. Yeah, of course not. I mean, the critical piece here is the nature of the interaction with the victim and the trauma to the victim and the potential impact on the other lives involved. I know the community and the media react as though the principal focus is really on the basketball, but that's irrelevant to us. It really is.